Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at a really interesting business case study, something that I think will be really helpful if you're prepping for case study interviews.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And that is Akamai.
Akamai.
So Akamai, back in 2011, they were the leader in what's called a CDN, or a content delivery network.
Right.
And, they were facing this challenge of how to stay on top as the world was becoming increasingly localized.
Wow, it's a fascinating story.
And we have a bunch of Harvard Business School case studies to help us break this down.
Awesome.
So before we get into the specifics of Akamai's challenges, let's make sure our listeners understand what a CDN even is.
Yeah, good point.
So imagine you're trying to watch a movie online.
Okay.
Without a CDN, that movie file has to travel all the way from the server where it's stored.
Right.
Let's say it's in Los Angeles.
Okay.
To your device wherever you are, like London.
Uh-huh.
And you can imagine that takes a long time and leads to lots of buffering.
Absolutely buffering nightmares.
But that's where a CDN comes in.
Okay, how so?
So a CDN has this network of servers all over the world.
Okay.
And each server keeps a copy of that movie file.
Oh, I see.
So it's closer to the users wherever they are.
Okay.
So when you hit play in London,
yeah,
the data comes from a server that's much closer, like maybe in Dublin.
Gotcha. So it's all about speed and efficiency.
Exactly. Smooth streaming, no buffering.
Makes sense.
So Akamai was the king of this CDN world for a long time.
They were.
But they weren't the only ones. Who else was out there?
So you had some other players like Limelight,
Okay.
also from the U.S., and then CD Networks, which was based in South Korea.
Okay, interesting.
But what really made things interesting was that you had these telecom giants,
Oh, yeah.
like Amazon, with their cloud services who were starting to enter the market.
Yeah, they were a real threat.
Oh, huge threat. They had the infrastructure and the resources to really shake things up.
So how was Akamai trying to stay ahead of the game?
Well, they were expanding globally very quickly.
Okay.
Like in the early 2000s, they were setting up servers in places like the UK, Germany, France, Japan, all over.
So they were really trying to get their servers as close to users as possible.
Exactly. That was their big idea, decentralizing servers, what they called the edge of the internet concept.
And for our listeners who are prepping for case studies,
Yeah.
it's important to know that there are two main types of CDNs.
Okay.
Push CDNs, where content is proactively distributed to the servers,
Right.
and pull CDNs, where the content is fetched only when it's requested.
Gotcha.
Akamai primarily used a push model, which was all about optimizing performance.
Interesting. And I bet that approach played a role in what we're calling their localization challenge.
Exactly. This is where things start to get a little tricky for them. So Charlie Dublin, he was a VP at Akamai back then.
Okay.
He observed in 2009 that they were starting to lose market share to local competitors.
Oh, really?
Especially in markets that were further away from their headquarters in the U.S.
That's a key insight right there.
It is, and we have some pretty stark examples of this in the case studies.
Okay, like what?
So in Korea, CD Networks, remember them?
Yeah.
They were offering a similar service to Akamai's,
Okay.
but at a tenth of the price.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
Yeah, it was. And then in China,
Yeah.
a massive market with huge potential.
Absolutely.
Most customers had never even heard of Akamai.
Really?
Can you imagine that?
The global leader in CDNs, practically unknown in a major market. That's fascinating.
So clearly something wasn't working with their global approach.
Yeah, there were some disconnects for sure.
And I'm curious, did this lack of local awareness cause any problems internally in Akamai?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely created some internal friction. It really shows that what works in one place might not work somewhere else, right?
Yeah, it's like assuming everyone wants the same pizza toppings no matter where they live.
Exactly.
So we've talked about how Akamai's global pricing strategy made it harder for them to compete against local companies that could offer lower prices.
Right.
But it wasn't just about the cost, was it?
No, not at all.
Brand recognition, or I guess lack of brand recognition,
Yeah.
played a big role.
Oh, definitely. Especially in markets like China.
Right.
Imagine your business in China
Okay.
and you need a CDN. You see two options. One is a local brand you recognize. The other is this company called Akamai you've never heard of.
Yeah.
Who are you going to trust more?
Probably the one I know.
Exactly. Brand recognition builds trust.
Especially when it's something as important as your online business.
It's a big decision.
So Akamai knew they had to make some changes.
Right.
And in 2011, they tried to reorganize things.
Okay, how so?
They divided their operations into 3 geographic theaters.
Okay.
The Americas EMEA, which stands for Europe, Middle East,
Yeah.
and Africa.
Got it.
And then APJ for Asia Pacific Japan.
Interesting.
The goal was to give more power to the local teams
Yeah, that makes sense.
and to improve communication.
Seems like a logical step.
But this raises a good question.
What?
Can a simple restructuring actually fix deep-rooted problems?
That's a great point.
It's like rearranging the furniture in a house with a leaky roof.
Yeah, you might make it look nicer.
But you haven't solved the real problem.
Exactly.
So this reorganization was meant to clear up confusion about which customers belong to which teams,
Okay.
and to improve their understanding of each market.
Sounds good in theory.
But it also left some big questions unanswered.
Like what?
Like what parts of the business needed to stay global?
Right.
How do you balance the needs of each local market with a global strategy?
Oh, a tough question.
They are, and those are exactly the kinds of questions you might get asked in a case study interview.
Yeah, good point.
So it seems like Akamai's experience is a valuable lesson in how to scale a business globally, but without losing touch with what's happening in each local market.
It's a tough balancing act.
It is, for sure.
So for our listeners who are getting ready for those case study interviews,
Yes.
let's turn this into some actionable takeaways.
Oh, yeah.
If you were presented with Akamai's situation, what are the key things you would highlight?
Well, first, I'd emphasize the importance of really thorough market research.
Yeah, that's crucial.
Akamai made some assumptions about certain markets.
Especially those further from their U.S. base.
Right, and those assumptions ended up costing them.
Because they didn't fully understand the competitive landscape.
Exactly, and they overestimated how appealing their existing products and prices would be.
It's like showing up to a potluck with a dish everyone loved at your last gathering.
Okay.
Only to realize everyone at this potluck has different tastes.
You got to know your audience.
Exactly. In business, that means really understanding the specific needs and preferences of each market.
And even the cultural nuances.
Absolutely.
Which leads to another important takeaway.
What's that?
Flexibility in product development and pricing.
Oh, yeah. That's key.
Akamai's global product team seemed a little out of touch.
In a bubble.
Kinda, yeah. They were pushing out products and setting sales targets without really understanding what was happening on the ground.
And their one-size-fits-all approach wasn't working.
Not at all.
It highlights the need for feedback and adaptation.
You need to be willing to adjust your products and your prices.
To fit each market.
That's like you wouldn't wear a heavy winter coat in the desert, right?
No way you'd overheat.
You adapt your clothes to the climate.
And businesses need to adapt to the climate of each market.
Exactly. We also can't forget about brand recognition.
Right.
Akamai's lack of brand awareness, especially in places like China, was a major obstacle.
It was.
Building a strong brand takes time and effort.
But it's an investment worth making.
For sure, especially if you want to be a global leader.
It's about building trust and familiarity.
If customers don't know who you are,
They're less likely to choose you.
even if your product is better.
So now let's talk about that elephant in the room.
The reorganization.
Exactly. Was it the right move?
Did it actually work?
It's a classic case study dilemma,
On the one hand, it tried to give more power to those local teams.
which could make them more responsive to the market.
But on the other hand, it made things more complex,
How do you keep things consistent across different regions?
while still having a unified global strategy.
And how do you prevent the organization from becoming too fragmented?
These are all important questions to think about.
Definitely.
And how do you avoid just shifting the problem around?
Right.
Like if you give local teams control over pricing,
Yeah.
how do you stop them from undercutting each other?
And hurting profit margins.
These are all valid concerns.
And the success of any reorganization really comes down to how it's implemented.
Exactly. It's not just about changing the org chart
It's about creating a culture of collaboration,
and communication.
making sure everyone understands the big picture.
So this brings us to a big challenge that a lot of global companies face.
What's that?
How do you achieve global scale without sacrificing local relevance?
Yeah, there's no easy answer to that one.
What do you think is most important?
I think recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution,
Okay.
the best approach will always depend on the specific company.
And the industry.
And, of course, the markets they're operating in.
And that's what case study interviews are all about.
Showing you can analyze complex situations.
And propose solutions.
Exactly.
So how do companies actually manage this?
How do they walk that tightrope?
Yeah, how do they go global but still stay relevant locally?
Well, one key thing is making sure there's good communication between headquarters and those local teams.
Makes sense.
And I mean more than just top-down orders, you know.
Right. It's got to be a two-way street.
Exactly. Headquarters needs to know what's going on in each market.
And the local teams need to understand the big picture.
Yeah, where they fit into the overall strategy.
So it's not enough to just have a global strategy.
No, you have to empower those local teams to make decisions too.
But within certain limits, I imagine.
Of course, you need some kind of framework.
Right, so they can be flexible and respond to local conditions.
But still stay aligned with the company's goals and values.
Finding that balance between giving them freedom and maintaining control.
That's the tricky part.
This reminds me of that term localization.
Oh, yeah.
It might sound a bit like a buzzword,
It does.
but I think it captures an important concept.
I agree. It's about thinking globally but acting locally.
Right, finding ways to tailor your products or services to different markets.
But without losing sight of your overall brand and strategy.
So it's not about creating completely different products for every market,
No, it's more like adjusting the recipe a little bit.
like adding different spices to suit different tastes,
Exactly. It could be something as simple as translating your marketing materials.
or as complex as changing product features to fit local customs. It's all about finding the right balance between being consistent and being customized.
You want to be efficient,
But you also want to be sensitive to each market,
and that requires a deep understanding of the culture.
not just the market dynamics.
Yeah, things like local customs values, even humor,
Things that might not be obvious at first.
but can really make a difference in how people see your brand.
So it's not just what you say
It's how you say it,
and how it's perceived in that cultural context.
which is why it's so important to have local expertise on your team.
People who really understand the market.
Yeah, people who can give you insights that you wouldn't get just from data.
It's like having a cultural guide,
Someone who can translate not just the words.
but the meaning behind them.
Exactly, and that's where Akamai stumbled a bit.
Even though they were a global leader,
They didn't always pay enough attention to those local nuances.
and it cost them.
It shows that global expansion isn't just about copying and pasting what works in one place.
You have to be thoughtful
And adaptable.
and willing to learn from your mistakes.
For sure, and for anyone who's preparing for case study interviews.
Yeah, this is a great example to study.
Akamai's story gives you a lot of insight into the challenges of doing business globally.
It highlights how seemingly small things,
Like cultural differences,
local competition,
brand perception.
those things can have a huge impact on whether a company succeeds or fails internationally.
It's all about thinking critically
Challenging assumptions,
and being able to see the big picture.
but also paying attention to those little details.
And that's exactly what interviewers are looking for in those case studies.
Can you analyze a situation
Identify the root causes.
and come up with solutions that make sense?
So for our listener, what's the big takeaway here?
What should they keep in mind as they're preparing for these interviews?
Be ready to really dig into those complexities of global business.
You need to be able to look at things from different angles
Figure out what's really going on.
and come up with solutions that are both strategic and practical.
It's not just about having the right answer.
It's about showing that you can solve problems.
And think on your feet.
The Akamai case is a great one to practice with.
To analyze their situation.
Think about what they did wrong.
And come up with your own solution.
And don't be afraid to think outside the box.
Be creative.
Because in the world of global business, being able to adapt and innovate is key.
Absolutely.
So use this deep dive as a starting point.
And go from there.
We've given you the foundation.
Now it's your turn to build on it.
Good luck with those case study interviews.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Bye, everyone.